It's January. A year-long gamble is about to pay off. Winemaking comes no riskier and no colder than this. In the frozen hour just before dawn, the last vineyard is about to be picked to make a very special wine. The grapes should have been picked 3 months ago, but they've been left, prey to rot, birds and wild boar, hoping for a night so cold that the grapes themselves actually freeze.
Morgen, es gibt zum Eiswein. 6:30 Uhr im Weinberg.
The grape that makes the best Eiswein of all is the world's most underestimated and most often mispronounced. To me, the Riesling grape makes the greatest white wines in the world, and they're seriously underpriced. Not neutral blends labelled Peasport or Mikkelsberg or something, but racy, nervy, risk-taking wines like this. It's got masses of crisp, refreshing, fruity acidity, and layers of flavour, minerals, lime, honey, all sorts of fruits, and it's relatively low in alcohol. You can drink it before or after a meal, and yet Riesling actually goes with a much wider range of foods than boring old Chardonnay. But the great test is that Riesling can actually improve in bottle for decades. And this Riesling is nearly 50 years old. I mean, it may look quite old, but it tastes like essence of youth. It comes from an extraordinary wine region which depends for its existence on this river, right at the edge of the wine-producing world. The Mosel Valley twists and turns through western Germany, flirting with the sun so that even locals lose their bearings. Vines shouldn't really be grown this far north, but the Romans didn't know that and needed something to drink, so they planted vines on the slopes where the snows melted first. The people crazy enough to work these slopes, angled like solar panels to stand a chance of ripening Riesling at all, have clearly confused vertigo with viticulture, and some of them have even sacrificed their lives to the vine. Why do all the best slopes then face south or southwest?
The south-facing slopes or southwest-facing slopes, the vineyards which are very steep, because it means the inclination, if the sun is going directly into the vineyards, they warm up the soils very fast. The slate which we have here warms up, collect the heat, and they're warm. Collect the heat, gives it in the cooler nights to the vineyards, and you see, as steeper the vineyard, as more directly the sun in the vineyard. Then, and it makes sense, if you have a south-facing slope like this one here, it has sunshine the whole day, so it collects the most warmness during the day. And if you see this little spot over there, which is in the shadow, it's less good as the one which you see beside of it. And you see, even in such a small angle, you have different microclimates. It's unbelievable. Here you possibly harvest Kabinett, and just next to it you harvest Spatlese, a much better quality. And then a third thing is the nearness to the Mosel. The Mosel is also a warmness reservoir, you can say. It collects the sunshine, it's warm, it gives a much more milder climate to the vineyards which are near to the Mosel as to the vineyards which is up the hillside. If you have sometimes cliffs around the vineyards, like you see here or down in the Erna Prelat, it makes another aspect, because the cliffs also collect the heats and act as a reflector. They reflect the heat to the vineyard, like the Mosel reflects the warmness and the sunshine to the vineyard, and then you have, say, a collection of 2, 3 or 4 times of sunshine. I think the Riesling which you grow here is uncomparable to all the Rieslings in the rest of the world, yeah? Because nowhere in the world you get wines with this light alcohol. You see, we produce wines with 7.5, 8%, 9% alcohol, and which have this raciness and this zip and we see this fruity character that you can drink 2 or 3 bottles in the evening or more.
Ernie Lozen's one of the Mosel's youngest and certainly most passionate winemakers. He shares this house with his father, who belongs to another age, when the world wanted quantity, not quality. Even in the Lozen's native Bernkastel, a tourist trap, fine German wines aren't selling. But why should the most difficult wines in the world to produce also be the most difficult to sell?
The problems we have nowadays started because the Mosel had been enlarged over double size from the early 50s to nowadays. It was 4,500 or 5,000 hectares, and nowadays we are 13,000 hectares. And it had been all enlarged on the opposite side where we had normally farming in the 50s. Everybody started to grow these vineyards on the other side because there they can produce much more. Here, for example, for 2 hectares, you need 1 man per year, and there you can mechanize, and then you can do with 1 man 10 hectares, so 5 times as much. Yeah, the big wineries or big bottlers, they pay a minimum per liter wine, and they say we are not interested in Riesling. Why we should pay more for the Riesling? Because we want to serve supermarkets and hypermarkets, and people who buy wines there anyway has no idea about Riesling or Müller-Thurgau. We sell it under fancy names and price pointed cheap. And this is the problem. How can we get out of this situation? It's a disaster.
Right. The Germans have made a real mess of their wine market, allowing any old sweetened-up blend to be sold at rock-bottom prices as quality wine. The result is that most people associate the word Riesling with something bland and sickly, if they can find it on Germany's often hideously complicated wine labels. Part of the reason German wine labels are so baffling is that there are thousands of tiny, obscure vineyards, each with dozens of owners. Believe it or not, top German wines once fetched higher prices than Chateau Lafite. The vines were so precious that it was worth owning just a row or 2.
The Germans are very much dedicated to making wines from a particular vineyard site. So instead of focusing on how to learn the art of blending wines from different sites to make the best out of it, we are more focused on bringing out the very best in each particular small vineyard size.
Well, you say that, but I mean that's not true, say, of Liebfraumilch or these bland, blended stuff that bears more than a passing resemblance to sugar water, really.
I think the direction went more a little bit in developing new techniques and making more wine, less costly, so cheaper way of producing and using high tech for that. And I think that's true for the last 20 years. But fortunately, this has changed or is changing currently. So we are trying to bring winemaking back in a way that it's considered to be an art instead of a technique.
Monika Christmann has come back to Geisenheim, Germany's most important wine research institute, after a spell in the outside world in California. How does German wine stack up against the competition then now?
The rest of the world has become pretty good. So we are in a very different way of presenting our wines or competing with wines from around the world. So I'm talking about a German wine market. There is no German wine market anymore because we are competing in Germany with foreign wines. And also the consumer has become more and more international. Today it's really, well, it shows that you're open to the world when you invite people for dinner and have a bottle of wine from California, Australia, South Africa, or from wherever, and say, well, tonight we have something special, instead of sharing a bottle of German wine with them.
At Geisenheim, the tiniest nut and bolt of wine production is examined with Teutonic rigour. This chap's doing a doctorate on taking corks out of bottles. Wine's one of the very few things we consume regularly that needs a special instrument and sometimes a lot of strength and frustration simply to open the package. But it's not just the physical difficulty of pulling these things out that's exasperating wine producers. It's the failure rate of these. At least one bottle in 20, and sometimes more, seems to be corked. Nothing to do with little bits of cork floating in your glass, but tainted and mouldy smelling, thanks to contact with a faulty cork affected by an invisible mould. That, by the way, is what you should be checking when a wine waiter gives you a wine to taste. And although some wine waiters go with a lot of performance, in my experience, the smell of the cork's entirely unrelated to whether the wine itself is likely to be corked or not. The cork industry is basically devoted to turning tree bark into a food-grade product that sells for fractions of a penny, so perhaps it's hardly surprising that it can't guarantee technical perfection. But the fact is that corks aren't essential at all. These are some of the wine bottle stoppers that have been proved to work just as well as a cork. This screw cap, even this beery crown cap, can keep a wine fresh for just as long as a cork, without the variation from bottle to bottle. But every bit of market research says we consumers would feel short-changed. So, this, a plastic copy, seems to be the most likely replacement for a natural cork. But I think it's ridiculous to have to continue to struggle with a corkscrew, yet end up with something that isn't visually or ecologically appealing. And you can't even use it to restopper a bottle. What we really need, I reckon, is a screw cap that goes when you untwist it. Now, some people deliberately uncork their bottles of wine an hour or so before serving them to allow the wine to breathe. But scientists point out that such a small area of the wine's in contact with air that it couldn't possibly have any significant effect on the bottleful. So the whole exercise is in fact a complete waste of time. You can have much more control over how a wine tastes by manipulating its temperature. Generally speaking, red wines tend to be served too warm. That room temperature recommendation dates from a time when rooms were much cooler than they are today. It's true that the warmer you serve any wine, the more of its flavour messages will escape to be enjoyed. But once it reaches the temperature of a hot room, the interesting bits may simply be boiled off, and it'll have no refreshment value at all. Whites, on the other hand, tend to be served too cool, so cold that none of the flavour can escape at all, and all you can sense is a cold, wet, acid liquid. Generally speaking, ideal serving temperatures for reds, and certainly full-bodied, not particularly aromatic whites such as Chardonnays, are surprisingly similar, just a few degrees cooler than comfortable room temperature. Freezing isn't a good idea, and nor, for the less scrupulous elements in one nation's wine trade, was antifreeze. News from Vienna of what a small but powerful group of Austrian wine merchants were up to horrified the world in 1985. To make wines taste sweeter and fuller, they added diethylene glycol, actually harmless but fatally for Austria's reputation, an ingredient in antifreeze. And all because natural sweetness is worshipped wherever it's difficult to achieve. Austrian, like German wine law, grades wines according to how naturally ripe the grapes were when they were picked. From just ripe grapes to make dryish Kabinett, through sweeter Spatlese and Auslese, up to really sweet, almost raisin-like grapes for BA and TBA, or Trockenbeer and Auslese. The sweetest wines of all. Each level used to be automatically rewarded with a hike in the price. But the really good thing about 1985, as the Austrians call their wine scandal, is that it forced a completely clean sweep. Austrian wines, no longer required to be sweet, are now some of the purest in the world. None more so than the dry, steely, whistle-clean Rieslings of the Wachau region, on the Danube upstream of Vienna. One of the new generation of winemakers dedicated to making this ultra-racy style of concentrated Riesling, which has beaten the best of Germany and France in blind tastings, is super modest Tony Bodenstein. His wines are to die for, and when I visited the Prager cellar in full fermentation, I nearly did.
Yeah. It's a little bit dangerous.
Why do you say it's dangerous down here?
Dangerous because we have enough CO2. In a half hour you cannot stay here. Is it too enough gas?
Not enough oxygen to breathe?
Yes.
It's true, I feel a bit short of breath.
Now we taste the first Riesling. Pardon. Here.
You have to be fit to be a winemaker, don't you? How you suck up 2 lots of wine in this atmosphere, I don't know. I'm running out of breath. So this is
the first
the great Wachau Riesling.
Yes.
Baby Wachau Riesling.
Baby Wachau.
Hardly finished fermenting.
I think the next 2 weeks. Our fermentation, our time of fermentation in this oak barrels per Riesling is 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Well, it is a baby, but it's got great class, hasn't it? Even in this state when what you're mainly smelling is fermentation and gas.
I think in a half hour you cannot stay here for 2 minutes. You must run out of the cellar.
Yes. I think we should go now.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sweet wines are probably the world's most misunderstood, which leaves all the more for addicts like me. Generations of consumers who've known nothing other than cheap, sickly stuff reeking of sulphur have been put off even trying better sweet wines. A good sweet wine isn't sickly at all. Its lusciousness is counterbalanced by acidity, so it has all the nuances of a fine dry wine, plus the extra intensity and the thrill of knowing just how difficult it can be to make a proper sweet wine. The most common commercial way of sweetening a wine is adding unfermented grape juice before bottling. Much more demanding for the producer and interesting for the consumer is to leave the grapes on the vine for as long as possible, hoping to convert sunshine into ripeness. Or you can freeze your toes off, picking frozen grapes, eliminating the water as ice, concentrating the sweetness to make Eiswein. You can also concentrate the sweetness by drying grapes between picking and fermenting them. Or you can do as the port producers do and stop fermentation by adding brandy, keeping the natural grape sugar in the wine. The most painstaking method by far looks the most unappetizing. You actually encourage fully ripe grapes to rot, a special sort of rot called noble rot, sometimes botrytis. The ideal conditions are misty mornings followed by warm, sunny afternoons, a combination found most reliably in vineyards around the Neusiedlersee. This extraordinary 20-mile lake, straddling Austria's southeastern border with Hungary, is so shallow you could walk across it if its bottom weren't so muddy. Much of it is a nature reserve, and the land so unremittingly flat that birdwatchers need towers to get any view at all. Evaporation is the key to that precious noble rot.
The right botrytis is when the grapes are full ripe and then overripe and then get botrytis in.
Like those ones?
Yes.
Absolutely disgusting. I mean, you really can make wine out of that.
Only with this. And with too much green grapes, like here, you can only make maybe a Spatlese or Auslese, but not a BA or a TBA. We have to cut only half grapes sometimes and select it 4 or 5 times.
You mean you sometimes have to go through a single vineyard 4 or 5 times?
Yes.
Alois Kraker's father, also Alois, says his son isn't experienced enough yet to be allowed to look after the vineyards, however many prizes he may have won for the sweet wines he's made back in the cellar. What exactly does the botrytis do to the grape to make it produce better wine?
He makes the skin thinner and he put water out, so it's more concentrated. And the big point by botrytis wine, it's also the point why I mean that botrytis wine is the greatest from all sweet wines, is botrytis conserved.
Oh, I see. So it makes a very, very sweet concentrated wine, but one that will also last and last and last.
Right.
And then you have to pay to protect all these horrible-looking grapes from the birds, which are your biggest problem, aren't they?
This is one of the biggest problems and costs a lot of money. And this is also, especially in my region, because it's a national park, one thing, Whitehair is not more botrytis wine, and Whitehair is a problem that we have not more younger winemakers.
Because
it's a social problem.
You can't really have a national park encouraging birds, and the birds desperate to eat your lovely grapes.
And it costs a lot of money to give net on. It's maybe 25 or 30,000 shilling per hectare.
Just to put the nets on.
And work. Not all wineries have so much money.
But some of them have more selling nous. Alois's cousin, Willie Opitz, until recently marketed cat food during the week. His real passion, though, is his range of sweet wine curiosities, such as his very own Schilfmandel, a dried grape wine made using mats of the local reeds, and boxes from a friendly greengrocer.
We pick the grapes in very healthy conditions for the Schilfmandel and bring them very carefully home and dry them for about 8 to 10 weeks. And then we select again only the very healthy ones and bring it to our small basket press from my grandfather and press them so gently as possible.
Willie makes tiny quantities of weird, wonderful and extremely expensive sweet wines, his bemused parents doing much of the donkey work.
You see, we are just using all the equipment, the small cellar from my grandfather, the small press from him, the same crunching machine, so everything is handmade and we are very traditional and we try to have with local grape varieties something new and something outstanding, I think, and non-comparable. We wouldn't like to be in a competition with other sweet wine producers, like the people in Sauternes. We just try to be on our own grapes and make them so unique as possible. This year, we will store the bunches on the reed beds till we get the first frost and press them then. So we had the drying process, so concentrate all the goodies and also add the frost component, so it will end up with something nobody has done before. And we are able to do this here.
So it will be a reed wine Eiswein.
Exactly.
But that's illegal, isn't it? Or?
It's not now written in the law, but you know, they had to rewrite the Austrian law according to our Schilfmandel from 1989. And so probably they have to do it next year. But invention does not happen on a green table. Invention happens in the heart, in the brain, and through people like my wife and me.
In this curious battleground between birds and winemakers, Alois Kracher drives his day's work to the official weigh station, which, since 1985, must weigh his lorry load of nobly rotten grapes to the last gram, just to make sure that Austrians are never again tempted to indulge in vinous hanky-panky. Perhaps what the Germans need is a real humdinger of a scandal. Less than 10 miles in that direction are the vineyards of Willy Oppitz and Alois Kracher, whose wines can sell for more than £40 or $60 a half bottle. Behind me is Hungary, where $60 is more than the average weekly wage. Until very recently, the Iron Curtain ran along here, dividing technically clued-up Western winemakers from the vast, neglected, but potentially exciting vineyards of Eastern Europe. All that's changed, though. Since the breakup of the Soviet bloc, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Moldova, Slovakia have all been invaded by temperature control, stainless steel, new oak barrels, all the tricks of modern winemaking, so that they too can produce consistent, fresh wines targeted directly at the outside world. And these developing countries' thirst for hard currency has kept prices way down. It's not surprising that the wine producers of Western Europe see a new threat from the East. Imagine, for example, what would happen if wine producers on the shores of the Hungarian bit of the Neusiedlersee set their minds on making top-quality but cheap sweet wine. Eastern Europe clearly has very much more to offer than what we used to call Lutimer Riesling.